The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of the weathered trading post, and Beatrice Sullivan watched from beneath the brim of his worn hat, as a woman descended with such controlled fury in her movements that dust seemed to part ways in deference. She carried a battered fiddle case in one hand and a carpetbag in the other, her dark green traveling dress somehow pristine, despite 3 days on dusty California roads. Her auburn hair had been pinned into submission, but wild tendrils escaped around her face, catching the late afternoon sun like copper wire. But it was her eyes that stopped him cold as she turned his direction, gray as winter storms and twice as fierce, scanning the rough street of Reading with an expression that suggested she found it all severely wanting. Beatrice had been leaning against the post outside the general store, pretending to read a week-old newspaper while his stomach twisted itself into knots. The letters had seemed like such a practical solution 6 months ago when loneliness and the endless work of his ranch had driven him to answer an advertisement in a San Francisco paper. A mail-order bride. The words still felt strange in his mind, impersonal and businesslike, nothing like the romantic notions he had once harbored as a younger man. But he was 28 now, his youth spent building something worthwhile out of unforgiving land, and practical solutions had their own merit. He had not expected her to look like vengeance personified. Katherine Reed's gaze swept across the rough timber buildings, the muddy Main Street, the handful of men who had stopped their work to stare at the newcomer. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She paid the driver with crisp efficiency, declined his offer to help with her bags, and stood there in the center of the street as if daring the town itself to disappoint her further. Beatrice pushed off from the post and crossed the street, his boots making soft sounds in the dirt. He removed his hat as he approached, revealing dark brown hair in need of a trim and eyes the color of honey that his sister had once told him were his only remarkable feature. At 6 feet tall with shoulders broadened by years of hard work, he cut an imposing figure, but he suddenly felt as awkward as a schoolboy approaching the teacher's desk. "Miss Reed." His voice came out rougher than intended. Those storm-gray eyes fixed on him with such intensity he nearly stepped back. "Mr. Sullivan, I presume?" "Yes, madam, Beatrice Sullivan. Most folks call me Beau." He gestured vaguely at the town around them, feeling foolish. "Welcome to Reading, welcome home." The words hung in the air between them, both tender and presumptuous. Her expression did not soften, but something flickered in her eyes, too quick to name. "This is home, is it?" She surveyed the street again, and he tried to see it through her eyes. Reading in 1876 was still rough around the edges despite the railroad that had come through 6 years prior. The buildings were mostly wood, some unpainted, others wearing peeling whitewash. The street was dirt, turning to mud whenever it rained. It was nothing like San Francisco, where he knew she had been living with her aunt and uncle. "It is for me," he said simply. "Has been for 5 years now. I know it does not look like much. It looks exactly like what it is." She shifted the fiddle case to her other hand, and he noticed how carefully she held it, how her fingers curled protectively around the handle. "Shall we conduct business here in the street, or is there somewhere more appropriate? Business." The word landed like a stone in his chest, but he supposed that was what this was. A business arrangement between two practical people seeking practical solutions to practical problems. He had written about his ranch, about his prospects, about the life he could provide. She had written about her musical education, her housekeeping skills, her willingness to relocate for the right opportunity. Neither of them had written about love. "The Reverend is expecting us," Beau said, settling his hat back on his head. "If you are not too tired from traveling." "I would prefer to settle matters promptly." Catherine's chin lifted slightly. I have come this far. I do not see the point in delaying. He wanted to offer her rest, refreshment, time to reconsider. Instead, he reached for her carpet bag. May I? She hesitated, then allowed it, keeping the fiddle case firmly in her own grip. They walked side by side down the main street, and Beau was acutely aware of every eye following them, every whispered conversation. Reading was small enough that a new arrival was noteworthy, and a mail-order bride was the kind of news that would circle the town before sundown. The church was a modest white building at the end of the street, its steeple pointing toward the cloudless California sky. Reverend Marcus had been one of the first people to welcome Beau to Reading, and when Beau had quietly mentioned his plans to find a wife through correspondence, the Reverend had offered neither judgment nor effusive approval, only practical support. They found him in the small garden behind the church, tending to a patch of vegetables that seemed to thrive despite the dry climate. He was a lean man in his 50s with kind eyes and dirt under his fingernails. Reverend, this is Miss Katherine Reed, Beau said. Katherine, Reverend Thomas Marcus. The Reverend wiped his hands on his work apron and extended one to Katherine. Welcome, my dear. I hope your journey was not too arduous. It was enlightening, Katherine said, shaking his hand with the same firm efficiency she seemed to apply to everything. Thank you for agreeing to perform the ceremony on such short notice. Well, Beau here has been a good member of our small community. I am happy to help. The Reverend glanced between them, and Beau wondered what he saw. Two strangers about to bind their lives together on the strength of a few letters and a great deal of hope. Or at least, that was what Beau hoped Katherine brought with her in addition to that fierce expression. Shall we proceed inside, unless you need a few moments? That is unnecessary, Katherine said at the same time Beau said. Maybe we should talk first. They looked at each other. Up close, Beau could see faint shadows under her eyes, the tightness around her mouth that spoke of exhaustion and stress. He wondered what had driven her to this moment, what circumstances had led a clearly educated woman with musical talent to answer a rancher's advertisement for a wife. What would you like to discuss? Katherine asked, her voice carefully neutral. Everything, Beau thought. Your favorite color, whether you like morning or evening better, if you have ever been in love before, if you are afraid, if you think we are making a terrible mistake. But the Reverend was watching with patient understanding, and Katherine's posture suggested she was holding herself together through sheer force of will, and the sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains. Just wanted to make sure you are certain, he said quietly. You have come a long way, and I know the letters did not tell everything. I would not want you to feel trapped. Something in her expression shifted, a crack in the armor. Mr. Sullivan, I left San Francisco with 2 bags and a fiddle, everything I own in the world. I have no family who wants me, no prospects beyond this, and no illusions about romantic love. You offered a home and a partnership. I am here to accept those terms if you are still willing. The honesty of it hit him square in the chest. No pretense, no games. Just 2 people standing on the edge of a commitment neither of them had planned for. I am willing, he said, and Beau, please call me Beau. Then let us proceed. She turned to the Reverend. I am ready. The ceremony was brief and simple. They stood in the small church with its rough wooden pews and plain glass windows, while Reverend Marcus read from his worn Bible. Beau repeated the vows in a steady voice, promising to honor and cherish this woman he barely knew. Katherine's voice did not waver either as she made the same promises, her hand cool and small in his. When the Reverend pronounced them married, Beau leaned in to kiss his new wife, but Katherine turned her head slightly so his lips brushed her cheek instead of her mouth. Her skin was soft and smelled faintly of lavender. She stepped back immediately, creating distance between them. "Congratulations to you both," Reverend Marcus said warmly, clasping both their hands. "I hope you will join us for services on Sunday, Katherine. We have a small congregation, but a welcoming one." "Thank you, Reverend," Katherine said politely. They signed the register, Beau's familiar scrawl next to Katherine's precise script, making it official. Mr. and Mrs. Beatrice Sullivan. The weight of it settled over him like a physical thing. Outside, the sun was painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Beau led Katherine to where his wagon waited, hitched to two sturdy horses. He helped her up onto the bench, noticing how she clutched the fiddle case even as she allowed his assistance. "The ranch is about 5 miles out," he said, climbing up beside her. "We should get there before full dark." They rode in silence through the outskirts of Reading and into the open land beyond. The road wound through golden grass dotted with oak trees, the landscape rolling gently toward distant mountains. Cattle grazed in the distance, and hawks circled overhead in the cooling air. Beau loved this land, the way it seemed to stretch forever, the way it demanded hard work but rewarded perseverance. He hoped Katherine might come to love it too, or at least not hate it. "It is very open," Katherine said finally, the first words she had spoken since leaving town. "Yes, madam. Takes some getting used to if you are accustomed to city living." He glanced at her profile, the way she watched the landscape with wary attention. "The house is not fancy, but it is solid. I built it myself 3 years ago. 2 bedrooms, a good kitchen, a front room. There is a barn and a chicken coop, corrals for the horses and cattle. You run the ranch alone. I have 2 hands who help during busy seasons. Miguel comes up from Sacramento when I need him for roundup and branding. Tom is a local fellow who helps with breaking horses. But mostly, yes, it is just me." He paused. "Just us now, I suppose." Katherine absorbed this in silence. Beau wondered if she understood what she had signed up for, the isolation, the work, the loneliness of ranch life. He had tried to be honest in his letters, but words on paper could not capture the reality of it. The sun was touching the horizon when the ranch came into view. The house sat on a slight rise, a sturdy wooden structure painted white with a covered porch running along the front. The barn was larger than the house, a necessary priority. Fencing enclosed the corrals, and he could see his horses moving in the paddock, their coats gleaming in the fading light. "This is it," he said, unable to keep a note of pride from his voice. "The Running S Ranch." Katherine studied the property with the same careful assessment she had given everything else. "You built all of this in 5 years. Well, I had help with the barn, but yes, madam. Stop calling me madam. We are married now." She climbed down from the wagon before he could help her, landing lightly in the yard. "You should call me Katherine, or Kate if you prefer." "Katherine," he said, testing the name. It suited her, formal and strong. "Let me show you inside." He grabbed her carpet bag while she took the fiddle case and led her up the porch steps. The door opened into the front room, furnished simply with a sofa he had bought used in town, a table he had built himself, and an armchair positioned near the fireplace. The kitchen was visible through an open doorway, clean and orderly because he had spent the last week making sure everything was perfect. "The bedrooms are through here," he said, leading her down a short hallway. He opened the first door, revealing the larger of the 2 rooms. He had put fresh sheets on the bed, arranged wildflowers in a jar on the dresser, tried to make it welcoming. "This is the main bedroom. I thought you might like it." Katherine stood in the doorway, taking in the iron bed frame, the simple dresser, the window that looked out toward the mountains. "Where will you sleep?" "The other bedroom is smaller, but it has a good bed. I will be comfortable there." He had already moved his things that morning, a decision that had seemed obvious but now felt presumptuous. I thought, given the circumstances, you might prefer some privacy. She turned to look at him, and for the first time since her arrival, her expression softened slightly. That is considerate of you. We are strangers, Katherine. I do not expect. He trailed off, unsure how to finish that sentence. What did he expect? Eventually, they would need to have this conversation, but not tonight, not when she looked so tired and he felt so uncertain. I appreciate your understanding, she said quietly. She set the fiddle case on the bed with the same careful reverence he had noticed before. Is there somewhere I can wash up? Of course. I will heat some water for you. He showed her the small washroom, then retreated to the kitchen, grateful for something practical to do. While the water heated on the stove, he prepared a simple meal from the supplies he had laid in. Bread from the bakery in town, cheese, cold chicken he had roasted the night before, the first tomatoes from his garden. It was not fancy, but it was the best he could offer. Katherine emerged from the bedroom 20 minutes later, her hair unpinned and hanging in a thick braid over one shoulder. She had changed into a simpler dress, dark blue cotton that made her eyes look even more gray. Without the armor of her traveling clothes and severe hairstyle, she looked younger, more vulnerable. I thought we could eat on the porch, Beau said, gesturing to the plates he had prepared. It is cooler outside, and the view is nice. They carried their food out to the porch and sat in the two chairs Beau had positioned there for evenings when the work was done. The sky had deepened to purple, and stars were beginning to appear. The air smelled of grass and dust, and the distant scent of pine from the mountains. They ate in silence for a while, the quiet broken only by the sounds of the ranch settling for the night. A horse whinnied softly in the barn, and somewhere a coyote called out to the rising moon. "The fiddle," Beau said finally. "You must be quite accomplished. You mentioned in your letters that you studied music." Katherine's fingers tightened on her fork. "My mother was a violinist. She taught me from the time I was small. After she died, my aunt and uncle took me in. They allowed me to continue lessons because my mother had wanted it, but they considered it an extravagance. I would like to hear you play sometime, if you would be willing." "Perhaps." She took a sip of water from her glass. "Your letters mentioned you were from Wyoming originally. What brought you to California?" "My parents had a small ranch outside Cheyenne. When they passed, my sister got married and moved east with her husband. I sold the property and decided to start fresh somewhere new. I had always heard about California, the opportunities here. So I came west and found this land." "Do you regret it? Leaving Wyoming?" He considered the question. "Sometimes I miss the mountains, the way snow looks on the peaks. But no, I do not regret it. This place feels like mine in a way the family ranch never did. I built it with my own hands, made my own choices. That means something." Katherine nodded slowly, as if she understood that sentiment. "I left San Francisco with no regrets either. My aunt and uncle made it clear I was a burden, an obligation they had fulfilled by raising me. When I turned 23 this spring, they began pressuring me to marry a business associate of my uncle's. He was 52 years old and already buried 2 wives. I declined, and they told me I should start making arrangements to support myself." The casual cruelty of it stirred anger in Beau's chest. "So you answered my advertisement?" "Among others. But your letters were honest. You did not make grand promises or try to paint a picture of something that did not exist. You seemed like a decent man looking for a partner, not a servant or a decoration. That appealed to me." "I am trying to be decent," he said. "I cannot promise I will always succeed, but I will try." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw calculation in her eyes, weighing and measuring. "I can work hard. I am not afraid of labor. I can cook and clean and manage a household. I may not know ranching, but I can learn." "I do not doubt it." He meant it. There was a core of steel in this woman that suggested she could learn anything she set her mind to. "And in return, I expect respect, partnership, as you mentioned in your letters. I will not be property or chattel." Her voice was firm, brooking no argument. "You are my wife, Katherine, my equal. I need a partner, not a servant." Some of the tension left her shoulders. "Then I think we understand each other." The moon had risen fully now, painting the landscape in silver light. Beau gathered their empty plates and brought them inside while Katherine remained on the porch. When he returned, she was standing at the railing, looking out at the dark shapes of the mountains against the star-filled sky. "It is beautiful," she said softly. "Lonely, but beautiful." "It can be lonely," he admitted, coming to stand beside her, "but maybe it will be less so now." She did not respond to that, just continued gazing at the night. After a moment, she turned and walked back into the house. "I should sleep. It has been a long few days. Of course, I will be up early to tend the animals. You can sleep as late as you like. I am accustomed to rising early." "What time do you start?" "Around 5:30, usually." "Then I will have breakfast ready by 6. She paused in the doorway to her room. "Good night, Beau." "Good night, Katherine." He listened to the soft sounds of her moving around the bedroom, the creak of the bed frame as she settled in. Then he went to his own smaller room, lay down on the narrow bed, and stared at the ceiling. He was married. To a woman with fierce eyes and a fiddle and secrets written in the tightness of her shoulders. A woman who had come here with everything she owned, looking for something he hoped he could provide. A woman he knew nothing about and yet was now bound to for life. Sleep was a long time coming. Beau woke before dawn, as was his habit, dressed quietly, and slipped out of the house without disturbing Katherine. The animals needed tending regardless of life's upheavals. He fed the horses, checked on the cattle in the near pasture, collected eggs from the chickens. The familiar routine settled his nerves. When he returned to the house an hour later, the smell of coffee and frying bacon greeted him. Katherine stood at the stove, still in her blue dress from the night before, her braid pinned up in a coronet around her head. She had found his apron and tied it around her waist. "I hope you do not mind," she said without turning around. "I explored the kitchen to see what we had to work with. It is your kitchen now, too." He hung his hat on the peg by the door and washed his hands at the basin. "Smells good." She had set the table with more care than he ever bothered with, plates and utensils neatly arranged, a jar of wildflowers in the center. The bacon was perfectly crispy, the eggs cooked just right, and she had somehow made biscuits that were golden and fluffy. "This is wonderful," he said after the first bite. "Better than anything I could make. My aunt insisted I learn proper cooking. She said it was the only practical skill I had." Katherine's tone was dry. "I suppose she was right about that, at least." They ate together as morning light flooded through the windows, painting everything in shades of gold. It felt almost domestic, almost normal, if he did not think too hard about the strangeness of sharing breakfast with a woman who had been a stranger yesterday. "What are your plans for today?" Katherine asked, refilling his coffee cup. "I need to check the fencing in the south pasture, make sure it is secure before I move more cattle down there. Then I want to work with one of the young horses, continue her training." He hesitated. "You are welcome to come along if you are interested. Or if you would prefer to settle in here, that is fine too. I would like to see the ranch, understand what you do." She stood and began clearing the plates. "Give me a few minutes to change into something more practical." She emerged 15 minutes later in a simpler dress of brown cotton, sturdy boots, and a broad-brimmed hat that must have been packed in her carpet bag. She looked ready for work, and Beau felt a flicker of admiration. He saddled 2 horses, his reliable gelding Scout and a gentler mare named Daisy. Katherine approached the mare with caution but no fear, letting the horse sniff her hand before stroking her neck. "Have you ridden much?" Beau asked. "Some when I was younger. My mother loved to ride." She accepted his help mounting, settling into the saddle with reasonable comfort. They rode out into the morning, and Beau showed her the boundaries of his property, the pastures where cattle grazed, the creek that provided water year-round. He explained his plans for expansion, his hopes for building up the herd, the challenges of ranching in California's dry climate. Katherine listened intently, asking intelligent questions that showed she was genuinely trying to understand. She did not complain about the heat or the dust or the long stretches of silence as they rode. When they stopped by the creek to let the horses drink, she dismounted easily and sat on a flat rock by the water. "How much land do you have?" she asked. 200 acres. "I bought it cheap because it needed a lot of work. The previous owner let it go to ruin." He sat beside her, watching the water flow over smooth stones. "But the bones of it are good. Good water, decent grazing, close enough to town to get supplies but far enough out for privacy. You have done well for yourself." She trailed her fingers in the cool water, building all of this alone. "I had help along the way. Neighbors helped with the barn raising. The Reverend helped me understand the local laws and land rights. Miguel taught me about cattle management when I first started." He picked up a smooth pebble and tossed it into the water. "Community matters out here. People look after each other. I have never lived in a small community. San Francisco is large enough to be anonymous." She drew her hand back from the water and dried it on her skirt. "I am not sure I know how to be part of something like that. You will learn. People are curious about you, but they are kind folks mostly. They will welcome you once they get to know you." Katherine's expression suggested she had doubts about that, but she did not argue. They mounted again and rode back toward the house, arriving as the sun reached its peak. The day had grown hot, and both horses and riders were ready for shade and rest. Over the next weeks, they fell into a routine. Katherine proved to be an excellent cook and a meticulous housekeeper. The house had never been cleaner or better organized. She planted a vegetable garden in a plot behind the house, coaxing tomatoes and beans and squash from the dry soil with patient care. She learned to collect eggs without spooking the chickens and how to separate cream from milk when Beau brought the pail from the neighbor's dairy cow he was borrowing. In return, Beau taught her about the ranch. She learned to recognize different cattle brands, to spot signs of illness in livestock, to check fencing for damage. She was not strong enough for the heavy labor, but she was observant and quick to learn. More than once, her sharp eyes caught problems he might have missed. They were polite with each other, considerate, careful. They shared meals and conversations about practical matters. They worked side by side during the day and retreated to separate bedrooms at night. It was a partnership exactly as they had agreed upon. It was also, Beau was beginning to realize, desperately lonely. He would catch glimpses of the woman beneath the careful control. The way she hummed while she worked, unconscious melodies that spoke of the musician within. The rare smile that transformed her face when something genuinely pleased her. The fierce concentration when she was learning something new, that same intensity he had seen when she first arrived now channeled into mastering ranch life. But she never played the fiddle, though he saw her take the case out sometimes and run her fingers over it before putting it away again. She never let her guard fully down, never stopped being so carefully composed. It was as if she was afraid that showing too much of herself might be dangerous. Sunday arrived, and Beau asked if she wanted to attend church services. Katherine hesitated. then agreed. She wore her green traveling dress, the nicest thing she owned, and pinned her hair up with particular care. The small church was fuller than usual, everyone curious to meet the new Mrs. Sullivan. Beau felt Katherine tense beside him as they walked in, her hand light on his arm but her spine rigid. Reverend Marcus welcomed them warmly, and several women approached after the service to introduce themselves. Martha Henderson, the doctor's wife, was particularly friendly. "You must come to tea this week, Katherine. I know how overwhelming it can be to settle into a new place. We ladies like to help each other out." "That is very kind," Katherine said with careful politeness. Sarah Chen, who ran the general store with her husband, offered to show Katherine where to find the best fabric when she needed to make new dresses. Young Emma Fitzgerald, barely 18 and newly married herself, chattered excitedly about how wonderful it was to have another young wife in the community. Beau watched Katherine navigate the attention with grace, but also clear discomfort. She answered questions politely, smiled at the right moments, but he could see the strain around her eyes. When they finally escaped to the wagon, she sank onto the bench with visible relief. "That was exhausting," she said. "They mean well, they are just curious. I know, I understand." She untied her bonnet and let it hang down her back. "It is just hard to be on display like that. Everyone studying me, judging whether I am good enough for their community." "You are more than good enough," he said firmly. She glanced at him, something flickering in her gray eyes. "You do not really know me, Beau. None of them do." "Then maybe it is time to change that." He kept his eyes on the road ahead. "I know you are private, Katherine. I respect that. But we are married. We live together. We are building a life together. At some point, we need to be more than just polite strangers." Silence stretched between them. Then, so quietly he almost missed it, she said, "I do not know how." That admission, small and honest, meant more than all their careful conversations. He reached over and took her hand, half expecting her to pull away. She did not. Her fingers were slender and calloused from new work, and they trembled slightly in his. "We will figure it out," he said. "Together." They held hands the rest of the way home, and it felt like a beginning. That evening, after dinner and dishes were done, Katherine disappeared into her room. Beau sat on the porch as usual, watching the sun set over the mountains and trying not to feel disappointed. Then he heard it: music. The fiddle's voice was pure and sweet, pouring through the open windows like liquid gold. Katherine was playing something classical, a piece Beau did not recognize, but that spoke of heartbreak and hope and beauty. Her bow danced across the strings, drawing out notes that seemed to contain entire worlds. He sat frozen, barely breathing, afraid that any movement might stop the music. She played for 20 minutes, one piece flowing into another, each more beautiful than the last. When she finally stopped, the silence felt heavy. Beau stood and walked to her bedroom door, which stood slightly ajar. Katherine sat on the edge of her bed, the fiddle cradled in her lap, her eyes closed. "That was beautiful," he said softly. Her eyes opened, and he was startled to see tears on her cheeks. "I have not played since I left San Francisco. I thought I might have lost it." "Lost what?" "The music. The part of me that needs it." She wiped at her face with the back of her hand. "My aunt said it was a useless skill, that I should focus on practical matters. She made me feel ashamed for loving it." Beau stepped into the room, drawn by the raw emotion in her voice. "There is no shame in making something beautiful. The world needs beauty, Katherine. It needs music." "My mother used to say that. She said music was how we remember we are alive, not just surviving." Katherine's voice broke slightly. "She died when I was 12. She was performing with the symphony and she collapsed during the concert. Her heart just stopped." "I am sorry." He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, giving her space but offering presence. That must have been terrifying. It was. One moment she was playing, more alive than anyone I have ever seen, and the next she was gone. My aunt and uncle took me in because they felt obligated, but they resented it. They resented me. I was a reminder of my mother, who they thought had married beneath her station when she chose my father. He was a musician too, a pianist, but he died before I was born. Cholera epidemic. The pieces were coming together, the history that had shaped this fierce, careful woman. So you have been alone for a long time. Yes. She set the fiddle carefully in its case. I learned to take up as little space as possible, to need as little as possible. When they told me to marry that awful man or leave, it was almost a relief. At least I could make my own choice about my future, even if it meant traveling to the middle of nowhere to marry a stranger. And now here you are, in the middle of nowhere, married to a stranger. He managed a slight smile. How is that working out? She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time there was no armor in her eyes. Better than I expected. You are kind, Beau. Kinder than you need to be, kinder than I deserve. Everyone deserves kindness, Katherine. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. And you deserve more than that. You deserve to play your fiddle whenever you want, to take up as much space as you need, to be fully yourself. Her breath caught, and for a moment, they just looked at each other. He was close enough to see the flecks of blue in her gray eyes, close enough to count the freckles across her nose that the California sun had brought out. Close enough to kiss her if she wanted, but he did not. Instead, he stood and moved toward the door. Thank you for playing tonight. I hope you will do it again. Beau, her voice stopped him at the threshold. Will you sit with me on the porch for a while? I do not feel like being alone right now. I would like that. They sat together in the cooling evening air, not touching but close, and Katherine told him stories about her mother, about learning to play, about the music that had shaped her life. Beau listened and shared his own stories in return, about growing up in Wyoming, about the dreams that had brought him to California, about the loneliness that had led him to place that advertisement. When they finally went to their separate rooms, something had shifted between them. The walls were still there, but cracks had appeared, letting light through. The next weeks brought a heat wave that baked the land and tested everyone's endurance. The work became harder, water more precious. Beau spent long hours ensuring the cattle had access to the creek, that the garden got enough water to survive, that the animals did not suffer. Katherine worked beside him without complaint, hauling water, tending the garden in the early morning before the worst heat hit, preparing meals that did not require heating up the house more than necessary. She tied her hair up in a loose knot, rolled up her sleeves, and embraced the work with the same fierce determination she applied to everything. One afternoon, Beau came back from mending fence to find her in the barn, currying Scout with long, smooth strokes. The gelding stood contentedly, clearly enjoying the attention. You are good with him, Beau said, startling her slightly. He is a sweet boy. She patted Scout's neck. I have been thinking about something. What is that? You mentioned wanting to expand the herd, but that you need more help during busy times. What if we hired someone permanent? Miguel is skilled, but he cannot be here all the time. Having an extra set of hands year-round would help. It was a good idea, one he had considered but dismissed as too expensive. It would mean less profit, at least at first, but more growth potential in the long run, and less burden on you. She came around Scout to face him. You work yourself too hard, Beau. I see you come in exhausted every night. If we are going to build something sustainable, we need to think long-term. The way she said we made his chest tight. She was thinking about the future, their future, as a shared thing. That felt significant. You are right, he said. I will ask around, see if anyone is looking for steady work. As it turned out, opportunity came from an unexpected source. The following week, a young man named Billy Sawyer showed up at the ranch looking for work. He was lean and sunburned, probably about 20, with honest eyes and calloused hands that spoke of hard labor. "I heard in town you might be looking for a ranch hand," Billy said, holding his hat in his hands. "I have been working at the Thompson Ranch east of here, but they are selling out and heading back to Missouri. I need work, and I am willing to work hard." Bo interviewed him, checked his references with Thompson, and hired him on the spot. Billy moved into the small bunkhouse Bo had built but never used, and proved to be worth every penny. He was good with horses, strong, reliable, and grateful for the opportunity. With Billy handling some of the daily labor, Bo had more time to spend with Katherine. They rode out together in the evenings when the heat broke, exploring the far corners of the ranch. She was becoming a competent rider, more confident in the saddle. On one such ride, they found a spot high on a hillside that looked out over the whole valley. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. They dismounted and sat on the grass, their horses grazing nearby. "I never imagined anything like this when I was living in San Francisco," Katherine said, her eyes on the view. "All that space, all that noise, everyone on top of each other. I thought that was what life was. Do you miss it?" "Sometimes I miss the culture, the concerts, the theater, but I do not miss feeling invisible and unwanted." She pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. "Here I feel like I matter, like what I do makes a difference. You do matter. You make all the difference." Bo's voice was rough with emotion. "This place has never felt more like a home than it does now." She turned to look at him, and the vulnerability in her eyes took his breath away. "I am glad I came here, Bo. I was so angry and scared when I stepped off that stagecoach. I felt like my life was over, like I had failed at everything. But maybe it was just beginning." He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering on her cheek. "Katherine, I know we started this as a practical arrangement, but I need you to know something. I am falling in love with you. Maybe I have been since the moment you stepped off that stagecoach looking like you wanted to set the world on fire. You do not have to feel the same way. I just needed you to know." Her eyes widened, and for a long moment she did not speak. Then slowly she leaned forward and kissed him. It was gentle and tentative, a question more than a statement. Bo answered by cupping her face in his hands and kissing her back with all the tenderness and passion he had been holding inside. She made a small sound and moved closer, her hands coming up to grip his shoulders. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Katherine rested her forehead against his. "I have been so afraid," she whispered. "Afraid to trust this, to trust you, to trust my own feelings. Everyone I have ever loved has left me one way or another. I did not want to risk that again." "I am not going anywhere, Katherine. I promise you that." "I think I'm falling in love with you too," she said, the words tumbling out quickly as if she was afraid she would lose her courage. "I have been fighting it because it was not part of the plan. We were supposed to be partners, colleagues. But you have been so patient and kind, and you make me feel safe and seen and valued. I do not know when it happened, but somewhere along the way, this stopped being just a practical arrangement." He kissed her again, deeper this time, and she responded with equal fervor. The setting sun painted them both in golden light as they held each other, finally letting down the last of their walls. They rode back to the ranch hand in hand, and that night, Katherine stood in the doorway of Bo's smaller bedroom with a question in her eyes. "I do not want to sleep alone anymore," she said softly. Bo stood and crossed to her, taking both her hands in his. "Are you sure?" "I am sure." She squeezed his hands. "I am tired of being afraid. I am tired of protecting myself from something good." He led her to the larger bedroom that had been hers alone, and they came together with tenderness and passion, learning each other slowly, carefully. Katherine cried a little afterwards, overwhelmed by emotion, and Beau held her close, stroking her hair and whispering reassurances. "I have got you," he murmured against her temple. "You are safe with me." "I know," she said, her voice muffled against his chest. "That is what scares me. I know it now, and that means I have everything to lose. Then we will make sure we do not lose it. We will build something strong enough to last." She fell asleep in his arms, and Beau lay awake for a long time, marveling at the weight of her trust, the gift of her presence. This fierce, brilliant woman had chosen him, had led him past her defenses. He vowed to himself that he would never make her regret that choice. The next morning, Katherine emerged from their bedroom with color in her cheeks and a lightness in her step that had not been there before. Billy noticed the change immediately, but was too polite to comment, though he smiled knowingly when he saw them together. Life settled into a new rhythm. Katherine and Beau shared a bedroom, shared their lives in deeper ways. She played her fiddle most evenings now, sometimes soft melodies, sometimes spirited reels that made Beau laugh and pull her into impromptu dances in the front room. They talked late into the night about everything and nothing, learning each other's minds as thoroughly as they had learned each other's bodies. Katherine attended Martha Henderson's tea and found herself enjoying the company of the other women more than she expected. She was still reserved, but she made an effort to be part of the community. She volunteered to play fiddle at a barn raising for a new family settling outside town, and her music was such a hit that she was asked to play at the harvest dance coming in the fall. Beau's ranch continued to prosper. With Billy's help, they expanded the herd and improved the property. Neighbors began to ask Beau's advice on cattle management, recognizing his success. The Running S Ranch was becoming known as one of the better operations in the area. In late August, Katherine realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another week to be sure, then told Beau one evening as they sat on the porch. "I think I am with child," she said quietly. Beau's face went through a series of expressions: shock, joy, fear, wonder. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be without seeing a doctor, but all the signs are there." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "How do you feel about it?" "Terrified," she admitted. "My mother died so young. What if something happens to me? What if I am not a good mother? What if I cannot do this?" "You can do anything you set your mind to, Katherine. You are the strongest person I know." He pulled back to look at her face. "And you will not be alone. I will be with you every step of the way. We will figure it out together." She let herself be comforted, let herself believe him. They visited Dr. Henderson the following week, and he confirmed the pregnancy. Katherine was healthy and strong, he assured them, and he saw no reason to worry. The baby would likely arrive in early spring. As her belly began to swell, Katherine bloomed. The pregnancy suited her, softening her edges while maintaining her strength. Beau watched her with awe. This woman who had arrived with a fiddle and a fierce look now carrying their child, making a home out of the house he had built, filling his life with music and love. The harvest dance in October was the social event of the season. Katherine played fiddle with several other local musicians, filling the decorated barn with lively music while couples danced and children ran wild. During a break, Beau led her outside for some air. "You are incredible," he said, kissing her forehead. "The way you played tonight, you had everyone mesmerized." "I forgot how much I love performing," she said, resting her hand on her still small belly. "How much I love sharing music with people. I thought I had to give up that part of myself to have this life, but maybe I do not have to choose." "You never have to give up any part of yourself, Katherine. You can be a mother and a musician and a rancher's wife and anything else you want to be." She looked up at him with such love in her eyes that it took his breath away. "How did I get so lucky? I was so angry when I came here, so certain I was settling for less, but I found everything I did not even know I needed." "We found each other," he corrected, pulling her close. "That is not luck. That is something better." Winter came, mild by Wyoming standards but cold enough to keep them close to the fire on long evenings. Katherine knitted tiny clothes for the baby while Bo carved a cradle from oak wood, sanding it smooth and perfect. They talked about names, about the future, about the kind of parents they wanted to be. Billy proved invaluable during this time, taking on more of the heavy work as Katherine's pregnancy advanced. He had become like family, joining them for meals and celebrations. When Christmas came, Katherine insisted on cooking a feast, and the three of them celebrated together, creating new traditions. The new year of 1877 arrived with cold rain that turned the landscape green and filled the creek to overflowing. Katherine was large now, moving with the careful deliberation of late pregnancy. She still helped where she could but mostly focused on preparing for the baby's arrival. In early March, on a night when the first wildflowers were beginning to bloom, Katherine woke Bo with a hand on his shoulder. "It is time," she said calmly, though he could see fear in her eyes. He sent Billy racing to town for Dr. Henderson while he helped Katherine prepare. She was calm through the early labor, breathing through contractions, letting Bo support her. But as the hours wore on and the pain intensified, her composure cracked. "I cannot do this," she gasped between contractions. "Bo, I am so scared." "Yes, you can. You are the strongest person I know, remember?" He wiped her forehead with a cool cloth. "I am right here with you. I am not going anywhere." Dr. Henderson arrived as dawn was breaking, and after examining Katherine, assured them everything was progressing normally. "First babies take their time," he said kindly. "You are doing wonderfully, Katherine." It was late afternoon when their son finally arrived, entering the world with a healthy cry that brought tears to both parents' eyes. Dr. Henderson placed the tiny, squalling infant on Katherine's chest, and she looked down at him with wonder. "He is perfect," she whispered. "He is beautiful," Bo agreed, his voice choked with emotion. He had never felt anything like this overwhelming rush of love and protectiveness. "You were amazing, Katherine." They named him Benjamin Marcus Sullivan, honoring both their families and the reverend who had married them. He had Bo's dark hair and Katherine's gray eyes, and from the moment he arrived, he owned their hearts completely. The weeks after Benjamin's birth were exhausting and wonderful. Katherine recovered well, and Bo discovered a capacity for tenderness he had not known he possessed. He would walk the floor with Benjamin in the middle of the night, singing off key lullabies while Katherine rested. He changed diapers and bathed the baby with careful reverence and stared at his son for hours, marveling at the miracle they had created. Katherine took to motherhood with the same fierce determination she brought to everything else. She was patient and loving, even when exhausted, even when overwhelmed. She sang to Benjamin constantly, and as he grew, she would play gentle melodies on her fiddle while he watched with wide, fascinated eyes. Spring turned to summer, and Benjamin grew from a tiny infant to a chubby, happy baby who smiled at everything and everyone. The ranch continued to thrive under Bo's management and Billy's hard work. They hired a second hand, a quiet older man named Jack, to help with the growing operation. One evening in late summer, when Benjamin was 5 months old and sleeping peacefully in his cradle, Katherine and Bo sat on the porch watching the sunset. "You remember when I arrived?" Katherine asked, her hand in Bo's. "How angry I looked." "You looked like you wanted to burn the world down," Bo said with a smile. "I was terrified of you. I was terrified, too, of everything, of failing, of being trapped, of never mattering to anyone. She leaned her head on his shoulder. I never imagined I could be this happy. That I could have a home and a family and a purpose. I never imagined I could love someone as much as I love you, Bo said. You and Benjamin, you are my whole world. We should have more, Katherine said suddenly. Children, I mean. I always thought I would be alone, but now I cannot imagine it. I want a house full of noise and chaos and love. Bo laughed, pulling her closer. Whatever you want, Katherine, I will give you the world if I can. I do not need the world, I just need this, us. Our family, our home, our life together. She kissed him softly. That is more than I ever dreamed of having. The years flowed by like the creek that ran through their property, steady and strong. Benjamin grew into a bright, energetic boy with his mother's musical talent and his father's love of the land. Katherine gave birth to 2 more children, a daughter they named Rebecca Ann when Benjamin was 2, and another son, Samuel James, when Rebecca was 3. The house that had once echoed with loneliness now rang with children's laughter and music and life. Katherine became known throughout the region as a talented musician. She played at weddings and dances, taught violin to children in town, and even performed occasionally with a small ensemble that formed among the community's musical residents. She never lost her fierce independence, but she had learned to let people in, to be part of something larger than herself. Bo's ranch grew into one of the most successful in the area. He became a respected voice in the local cattlemen's association, known for his fair dealing and innovative practices. But his greatest pride was not in the ranch's success, but in the family he had built with Katherine. Billy eventually married Sarah Chen's younger sister, May, and built his own small house on the edge of the Sullivan property. He remained Bo's partner in the ranch, now more friend than employee. Jack became like an uncle to the Sullivan children, teaching them to whittle and telling stories of his adventures as a younger man. The community that Katherine had once viewed with such wariness became extended family. Martha Henderson was godmother to Rebecca. Reverend Marcus baptized all 3 children and remained a close friend and advisor. The families helped each other through hard times and celebrated together during good ones. On their 10th anniversary, Bo and Katherine stood on the same hillside where they had first confessed their love. The children were with Martha for the afternoon, giving them rare time alone. 10 years, Katherine marveled, looking out over the valley that had become home. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I stepped off that stagecoach, and sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago. You were so fierce, Bo said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. I fell in love with you the moment I saw you, even though I did not realize it yet. I was so angry at the world, so scared of everything. She leaned back against him. I thought coming here was giving up, settling for less. I had no idea I was coming home. I told you welcome home that first day. You did, and I thought you were presumptuous. She turned in his arms to face him, but you were right. From the moment I arrived, even when I was fighting it, this was home, because you were here. He kissed her, deep and loving, the kiss of 2 people who knew each other completely and chose each other every day. When they finally pulled apart, Katherine was smiling. I have something to tell you, she said. What is that? I think we are going to need a bigger house. I am pregnant again. Bo whooped with joy and lifted her off her feet, spinning her around while she laughed. When he set her down, both of them were grinning like fools. 4 children, he said wonderingly. We are going to need more bedrooms. I was thinking we could add on to the house. Make it bigger, add a proper music room too, somewhere I can teach and practice without disturbing everyone. Whatever you want, Katherine, always. They stood together on that hillside, looking out over the land they had built a life on and talked about the future. about the addition they would build on the house, about whether the new baby might be twins, about teaching their children to love this land as much as they did, about growing old together surrounded by family. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and in early spring of 1887, Katherine gave birth to twin girls. They named them Rose Elizabeth and Lily Grace, and the Sullivan household became even more chaotic and joyful. The house was expanded with the addition Katherine had wanted. The music room became her sanctuary, where she taught lessons to her own children and others from town, where she practiced and composed, where she sometimes played just for herself and remembered her mother. Benjamin grew into a responsible young man who shared his father's love of ranching. At 16, he was already talking about expanding the cattle operation even further. Rebecca showed her mother's musical talent, her violin playing rivaling Katherine's skill. Samuel was the scholar, always reading, talking about going to university to study law. The twins were still young, but Rose showed an early love of horses, while Lily seemed destined to be a musician like her mother and sister. Beau and Katherine's love deepened with each passing year. They had built something remarkable together, not just the ranch but a family, a legacy, a life filled with meaning and purpose. The practical arrangement they had started with had transformed into a love story for the ages. When Beau was 45 and Katherine 42, they sat on their porch one evening after putting the twins to bed. The older children were occupied with their own pursuits, and for a rare moment they had quiet. "You ever regret it?" Beau asked. "Answering my advertisement, coming here, giving up the life you might have had." Katherine looked at him with such love and certainty that it took his breath away even after all these years. "Not for one single moment. This life, this family, it is everything I never knew I needed. You gave me a home, Beau, not just a house, but a place where I belong, where I am loved, where I matter." "You gave me the same thing," he said, taking her hand. "I was just existing before you came. You taught me what it means to really live." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the land they had built their life on. In the distance, they could hear Rebecca practicing violin, the notes floating through the evening air. From the barn came the sound of Benjamin talking to the horses. The twins' laughter drifted from the house as Samuel supervised their bedtime routine. It was ordinary and perfect, this life they had created from an advertisement in a newspaper, and a leap of faith. Katherine had arrived with a fiddle and a fierce look, prepared to fight for survival. Instead, she had found love, family, and a place to call home. Beau had been looking for a practical solution to loneliness and found his soulmate instead. "Welcome home," Beau said softly, echoing the words he had spoken to her all those years ago. Katherine smiled, squeezing his hand. "I am home. I have been home since the day you said those words to me. I just did not know it yet." They sat together as the stars came out, two people who had found each other against the odds and built something beautiful. Their children would grow and have families of their own. The ranch would pass to the next generation. But the love story of Beau and Katherine Sullivan would endure, a testament to the power of second chances, the courage to trust, and the transformative nature of love. Years later, when grandchildren climbed onto Katherine's lap and begged for stories, she would tell them about arriving in Redding with everything she owned in 2 bags, about a cowboy who had been kind enough to give her space to be herself, about how love sometimes arrives in the most unexpected packages. She would play her fiddle for them, the same instrument her mother had taught her on, passing down the gift of music to another generation. Beau would tell them about building the ranch from nothing, about the hard work and the setbacks and the victories. But his favorite story was always about the day, a woman stepped off a stagecoach looking like she could take on the world, and how he had been lucky enough that she chose to take on life with him instead. They grew old together on the land they loved, surrounded by children and grandchildren, their love story woven into the very fabric of the ranch. The Running S became known not just as a successful cattle operation, but as a place built on love and hard work, where family came first and music filled the air. When Beau was 72 and Katherine 69, they celebrated their 44th anniversary surrounded by 3 generations of Sullivans. The house they had expanded over the years was filled to bursting with family. Rebecca had become a renowned music teacher, her own children carrying on the musical tradition. Benjamin ran the ranch now with his 4 sons, expanding it into one of the largest operations in Northern California. Samuel had become a judge, respected throughout the state, and returned home often with his wife and children. The twins had both married local men and stayed close, Rose managing the horse breeding program on the ranch while Lily taught music in town. That evening, after the celebration had wound down and most of the family had gone home or to bed, Beau and Katherine sat on their porch one last time. Katherine's hair was silver now, Beau's gone mostly white, but they still held hands like young lovers. "I think we did all right," Beau said, looking at the ranch that sprawled before them, now managed by their son but still fundamentally the same place he had built with his own hands. "We did more than all right," Katherine corrected. "We built something that will last, something that matters. We raised good children who are raising good children. We loved each other well." "Play something for me," Beau asked, as he had asked hundreds of times over the years. Katherine fetched her fiddle, the instrument showing its age but still producing beautiful sound. She stood on the porch in the moonlight and played the first piece she had played for him all those years ago, the one about heartbreak and hope and beauty. Beau listened with tears in his eyes, marveling that he got to spend his life with this fierce, talented, loving woman. When she finished, he stood and pulled her into his arms, dancing slowly with her on the porch they had sat on for over 4 decades. "I love you, Katherine Sullivan," he said. "From the moment you arrived with your fiddle and that fierce look until my last breath, I will love you. And I love you, Beau Sullivan. You gave me everything I needed and so much more than I deserved. You are my home, my heart, my everything." They danced in the moonlight, 2 souls who had found each other when both were lost, who had built a life beyond anything either had imagined. A mail-order bride and a lonely cowboy who had taken a chance on each other, and won everything that mattered. The ranch would continue through their children and grandchildren. Katherine's music would live on in the students she taught, and the children who inherited her gift. But more than anything, their love story would endure, passed down through generations as proof that sometimes the most practical decisions lead to the most extraordinary outcomes. As they finally went inside that night, Beau paused at the door and looked back at the land spread out under the stars. Katherine stood beside him, following his gaze. "No regrets?" he asked. "Only that we did not have even more time," she said. "But I would not trade a single moment of the time we had." They went inside together, to the home they had built, the life they had created, the love that had sustained them through 44 years of marriage. And in the morning, they would wake up together, as they had done for thousands of mornings before, ready to face another day of the beautiful, ordinary, extraordinary life they had made. Their story was simple in its way. A man placed an advertisement. A woman answered it. They met, married, learned to love each other, built a family and a legacy. But within that simplicity was everything that mattered: courage, trust, commitment, passion, tenderness, and a love that grew deeper with every passing year. Katherine Sullivan had arrived in Redding, California in 1876 with a fiddle and a fierce look, prepared for disappointment and determined to survive. Instead, she found a cowboy who saw past her armor to the woman beneath, who gave her space to be herself, who loved her completely. Together, they proved that practical beginnings can lead to passionate endings, that mail-order marriages can become love stories, and that sometimes the best things in life are the ones we never saw coming. And when both their times finally came, years later they went peacefully, knowing they had lived fully, loved completely, and left a legacy that would endure for generations. Their grandchildren would tell their children about Beau and Katherine, about the ranch built on love, about the music that always filled the air, about two people who found each other against the odds and built something beautiful. The Running S Ranch still stands, now in its 5th generation of Sullivan ownership. In the main house, hanging in a place of honor, is Katherine's fiddle, preserved carefully for posterity. And on warm summer evenings, if you listen carefully, locals swear you can still hear fiddle music floating on the breeze, a reminder of the woman who came west with nothing but a musical instrument and a fierce determination, and found everything she had ever needed. That is the story of Beatrice and Katherine Sullivan, of a mail-order bride and the cowboy who welcomed her home, of a love that started with practical arrangements and grew into something legendary. It is a story of the Wild West, of building lives from dust and determination, of music and ranching and family and love. It is, in the end, a story about coming home and about recognizing that sometimes home is not a place but a person, and sometimes the most unlikely beginnings lead to the most beautiful endings.